So the quarterback and the offensive coordinator for a grain elevator is the grain merchandiser. We're fortunate to have grain manager Tyronne Bialas here. He's a grain merchandiser. We're going to cover what is basis, what is grain merchandising. We're going to attempt to kind of get his view of the market, what he looks for, and we're going to kind of get to know him through his background and how he's came up in the grain business. I'm kind of biased because Tyronne's on my team, but I think Tyronne is a merchant's merchant. He could probably trade any desk, any large position in the world. He's just got this skill set of merchandising. I often tease him a little bit that he's got the spread on his gas mileage on his lawnmower down to the penny, and so that's a real skill and a real talent. So I've learned a lot from him, and so I'm interested to dive in and learn more about grain merchandising from Tyronne. So right away, Tyronne, what does before we get into your bio, what does the term market maker mean to you?
Well, first of all, Cohen, you're way too kind. I don't think that's true necessarily, but no, based on my experience and background, yeah, I feel like I have a handle on some of those spreads and markets. But market maker specifically to me is someone or something that's going to enhance the demand of a product or commodity. It's going to have a reason that it wants something or needs something, and it's going to create that market for it. And there are so many examples out there, ethanol consumption, feed consumption, exports, those are the main three. But you even talk about, people grinding corn or burning corn for corn stoves. So there's all sorts of demand for what that product is, and the market makers are they're the reason that demand is there. They have a use for it. And another way to look at it too, another example might even be, the index funds. Lately, in the last 10 years of marketing, Chicago Board of Trade Futures has been more difficult, more volatile, because there's more funds out in the marketplace. And although they're creating that liquidity and helping create those markets, it makes it more volatile on the movement. And thus it can be more challenging for farmers and people like that are actually looking to sell and make contracts. It can make it more challenging due to the influence they have.
Okay. Well, let's get to know you, Tyronne. I'm going to kind of break down your bio into 3 different parts. So tell me about the early days growing up on a farm. Is there any memories or anything you want to share about your experience there?
Sure. Lots of memories. Growing up on the farm was hard work. Growing up in the 80s and early 90s on the farm, farming was a lot different 30 years ago. I remember just working a lot. Probably in the mid 80s, I remember when we just started planting beans, being out on our hands and knees, pulling weeds and cockleburrs because they're so thick. I remember being in 3rd grade, starting to drive my 806 Farmall tractor. It was the first tractor that I learned to drive, and hauling big round bales and stacking them in a row and moving on to disking and cultivating in future years. Lived on that tractor, a lot of good memories on that tractor. Working hogs, we had a farrow to finish operation of about 60 sows that we bred and farrowed and finished them off. That was a lot of hard work. Hogs are hard work. We had some cattle, about 100 head of feeder cattle. We bred some of our own and calved them and raised them. So, and we even had some chickens. So it was a lot of hard work. We grew corn, beans, a little bit of wheat, once in a while some oats. So yeah, kind of the full gamut of doing what a farm kid does. Also remember a lot of picking rocks, fixing fences, kind can remember dragging a field of small grain that was recently sown wheat, and getting a little too close to the fence and ending up with a drag in the fence and having to pull that out with another tractor. So, I mean, it's a lot of memories and a lot of things that you learn as you grow up, but it leaves lasting memories, and you learn from those experiences as well.
So the west of Parkston and Dimmick area, the Bialas family has a pretty good foothold over there. So you had lots of siblings and uncles and cousins farming as well. Is there anything unique about that, or is there anything about that experience that you use in your merchandising life now?
Um, Off the top of my head, I can't say that there is. I just value that growing up so close to so many cousins and uncles and aunts that I had, that it was a tight family. I enjoyed the heck out of living out there about 8 miles west of Parkston, kind of between Parkston and Denmark there. Yeah, there's about 5 or 6 other uncles out there, and they had children as well, my cousins. So we had a lot of time growing up together. We did, at that right age, you know, from 13, 14 to 18, 19, we were hired out to walk a lot of other beans of uncles and aunts and cousins. So we all kind of helped out with each other. But it just a lot of family moments, being so close on the farms, all the gatherings for graduations, anniversaries, birthdays, you name it. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, through my years with Dakota Plains, I've got to know some of the Bialas clan, and I enjoy working with them, and smart farmers and smart business people. So that's been a pleasure for me to get to know that other side of your family.
Sure.
Talk about coming up in the grain business. What was your early experiences? Anything that sticks out? And then, you know, how did you pick merchandising as a career choice?
Well, so I graduated from SDSU with an ag business degree in '96. So I immediately jumped into a job with ADM out in Decatur, Illinois. Elevator manager trainee was the position. And for 8 years, I worked for them, I think in about 4 different locations. They move you around to get different experiences and to learn different things at different locations, because everyone is different markets, different customer bases, different commodities even. So that it's very good experience, very good value in that. In year 6 with them, I was put into a role of my own elevator. It was grain only on the CSX out in Parr, Indiana. And there was about 8 employees that we had, 3 in the office and 5 outside for operations.
Mm-hmm.
And there I got a really good taste of the full gamut of running an elevator. And the most enjoyment that I had for the roles that I had and the responsibilities that I had were on the merchandising side. So that's what I really enjoy doing. It's a challenge. Obviously, people know how challenging these markets are with so much world political issues going on. The market's ever changing with commodities and technology and hybrids and genetics. And so it always keeps you on your toes, always something new. That's where I guess my passion fell into for what I feel I enjoy the challenge of. And so that's kind of why I've kind of geared always toward, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of just moving off to enjoy that part of the job and career.
So working for a big ABCD grain company, what are some takeaways, you know, from that experience working for ADM that you use in your career now? You know, what?
Well, you do get to spend time with, early on in the first 3-4 years, you do spend time with, you know, the manager of the locations who were doing the merchandising roles as well, working with their merchandisers in corporate office. So you get to see what they're doing day in, day out, as far as what the markets are doing, what basis levels over Evansville, Indiana, or CSX markets to the southeast are doing, or UP markets, wherever your location is at. But you kind of watch over their shoulders to see what they're doing with managing their spreads and when they want to hedge their inventory out in which month where they're going to be anticipating making sales and moving it at those times. You kind of learn just watching and observing day in, day out of what's going on and how it all pertains to the revenue side of, your margin structure for what you need to cover your expenses at your elevator in your business. So I'm not going to say just absorb it in your mind, but you kind of do, just monitoring those day to day. But that's always been what it's where you learn the most right away. After working for that company for 8 years, I did jump into the ethanol industry for 9 years. And you learn a little more. You get a different perspective on a different use of that corn in a big way. But a lot of the origination side, the contracting side, working with farmers and elevators buying that grain, a lot of that is pretty similar.
So it's not just Tyronne Bialas. Do you have a family? What do you guys like to do as a family when you're not merchandising grain or anything at home? What do you guys like to do?
Sure, yeah. I've been married for 96, so we're going about almost 24 years to Emily. She actually was a junior in high school when I was a senior, so we started dating then. And right after college, we did get married and moved out to Decatur, Illinois, is where we started our life together. We had a boy in the year 2000, and we had a little girl, Katie. Camden's our boy, Katie's our girl. She was born in 2005. So we've got just the two kids. We've lived in Parker since 2007 is when we moved to Parker. That's when we moved up from in the ethanol industry down there from Central City, Nebraska to Parker. But yeah, we enjoy spending a lot of time together. We typically, I guess you could call us homebodies. I guess we don't go out an awful lot, but we enjoy being around each other. We have a lot of laughs. I personally like to golf. I don't get to do it often enough, but I love to get out there and golf. We'll eventually spend a little time on the water somewhere on some boats and beaches. And yeah, that's the gist of it.
What about Monday mornings? I usually get a good dose of basketball stats. How does basketball play a part in your family life?
Growing up, I really got into sports. I used to hunt and fish a lot when I was younger. My grandparents, who were from Armour, used to own the marina out by Platte. It was right on Highway 44 there by the bridge, and I think it was called D&D Marina. When I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, my older brother and I, we'd go out there and spend a week at a time there, and that was a lot of fun. We enjoyed spending time at the river and fishing, and a lot of time out there, a lot of good memories. But when I got 10, 11, 12 years old, I got myself more into sports, and I found I really, really liked it, playing summer baseball, playing basketball at school, football, just a lot of sporting activities. So I really enjoyed playing baseball even throughout high school and basketball. And, basketball in Parkson, we play a lot of teams, from kind of that bottom Scotland area all the way out west to, Platte, Gregory, Geddes, Wagner. So I played a lot of towns like that. We played some against some DeHaans out by Platte. I remember Adam DeHaan and Chad Kreitlow and Nathan Wunder from Armour, Roger Albrecht from Tripp. I remember playing those guys a lot in whether it be baseball or basketball. But basketball was always probably the most fun for me personally growing up, and even in college I played intramurals with some friends. And ever since Camden was in 4th grade, I was an assistant coach here for his little team, and it just grew with him as well. He really, really loved it. Became a pretty decent player in high school, so it consumed a lot of our free time. My daughter played basketball even through 8th grade. She's in 8th grade this year, so she's played for the last 4 or 5 years of school ball. But my son he was a pretty decent high school player, got a chance to play in college. He's playing at Dordt University over in Sioux Center, Iowa. He just finished his freshman year. He enjoyed it immensely. But so, yeah, we are very basketball consumes. I don't want to say consumes our family, but we're very, very busy with it here the last 5, 6 years, and probably will be for the next 4 or 5 years as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. So jumping into merchandising, so what's interesting? You've been a lot of places. What's interesting about the Dakota Plains trade territory and maybe some of the farmer customers that we serve? What's unique in your experience?
It's a good question. I struggle, I guess, picking one or two things about what makes it unique, but the only word that comes to mind for me is just how diverse it is. There's just a lot of variance on the type of farm operations we have in our trade area. And, there's so many different types of grains grown, even small grains. You see some oat fields, you see some spring wheat fields and milo. And there are just so many different types of commodities as broad as our trade territory is. Farming operations, you still see some farms that do have 50 to 100 head of cattle around, and you see some big operations that have 1,000 or 2,000 head around, and then you see some that are strictly just crops, where there's no more livestock on the farm. So just the diverse type of operations is probably the best way that on the 6 or 7 different stops throughout the Midwest I've been at, that's probably the best way to describe the local one.
So right now, where you're sitting, it's April 20th. What are kind of 2 information inputs that you're watching in the marketplace right now? What do you got your eye on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, everyone's got their eye on the coronavirus. That is such a big time game changer right now, and unfortunately, it didn't do its job alone. It started it, but I think right after the start of how coronavirus was getting a lot of the headlines, I think this oil war, in my opinion, has really caused, I think, a lot of market problems out there. You see the nearby crude month trading at $10 this morning. Even the June and July are still in the low 20s, but it's just having that trade war latch itself on to kind of the early stages of the coronavirus and how that was changing, causing less and less demand for products out there. And I'm talking mainly commodity products. That in the first and foremost has changed, I think, a lot of things. When you start with the lack of driving from the crude standpoint and how cheap it's got, that can help everybody's pockets. I saw your tweet over the weekend that you filled up 10.5 gallons of gas for $11.
Yeah.
And that's great for a consumer of fuel, but it's a sign that there's just not near enough demand for fuel. And it's because people are self-isolating, which in my opinion yet today may be the right thing to do yet, but it's surely putting a heck of a damper on this country's economy. It filters over in the ethanol side of things. When we're not driving and using fuel, those ethanol stocks just start piling up. And in the last 2-3 weeks here in April, the EIA information is just down like 15 to 20% a week from production, and yet the stocks are still growing. And that's just a horrible, horrible sign for how bad the ethanol demand is. And it's going to take us perhaps 6-8 weeks before we're going to dig ourselves out of a hole. And that's if we do start trying to slowly ramp up the economy again. And so there's some major problems. And I think that's first and foremost of some things I'm going to watch, because without that ethanol demand right now, I mean, that's 40% of our yearly corn consumption. That's a huge, huge deal. The second thing I'm watching is, Informa and a lot of the private companies come out there since January on prospective planted acres. And that's going to be a lot of discussion talks in the next 2 months. I think a lot of the privates were expecting 95, 94, 96 million acres of corn to be planted this year. And the USDA surprised a lot of people, including myself, on March 31st with 97, almost 97 million acres. That's a big number. The problem with that number is we already have corn, the carry out in 5 months. We have the carryover number from August 31st into September 1st, the new crop year. That number just grew to like 2.2 billion from 1.9 last on the April, early April USDA supply and demand report. If we do lack ethanol demand, let's say we cut ethanol demand by 50% in the next 5 months, which gets us to September 1st, that would not use 1.1 billion bushels of corn. And I think in the last report, the government dropped the ethanol by almost 400 million bushels, which might be that, a couple months maybe. But if this goes on longer, where we're out into, June, July, August, where we're still not running harder than 50%, we very easily could be adding another 400 million bushels onto that carryout number. It could grow as large as 2.5 to 2.6 billion bushels. And then when you throw on 94, 95, 96 million acres of corn, Scott showed 2 weeks ago, you did the interview with Scott for our producer meetings, and he had a slide up there that showed the corn carryout as high as 3.5 billion next year. And that's a scary number. I don't think we've ever been higher than the 2.5. He talked about, you talk about a 3.5 billion bushel number. That is going to take a couple years to eat through that. That's a big number. The one good thing we have going for us right now is from exports. The U.S. is more competitive, and we have some interest. We've been making some sales. The last 5 weeks of export numbers have been really, really strong compared to the rest of the year, which isn't saying much, but the last 5 weeks at least are strong. May, June, July, I think we've got a chance to make some export sales yet and load some boats and get rid of some of this corn, because we're going to need to get rid of as much as we can. What I haven't talked about yet is the bean number. I guess this will be the third thing, but the bean carryout number grew last year because of a lot of corn acres or bean acres planted in 18. It grew to 1 billion bushel carryout for a time last summer, rolling into September 1st. But it quickly changed with the drastic amount of drop from last year's bean plantings. If you think back to late May, early June last year, the price of corn was really strong. A lot of farmers were still going with corn in June rather than beans, because for them it made sense. The market was trying to buy corn acres last year. What got left out was the bean acres. From March 31 to June 30th, we planted 8 million less bean acres than what those early intentions were. That left a big hole in production. It's going to drop the carryout from 1 billion last summer to what's going to be around a 450 to 500 million this September 1st. That's a big deal when you cut your carryout in half. So that could open up the door for maybe a little bit of a bean pop this spring, trying to buy a few more acres. I don't think we need 94, 95 million corn acres. Maybe beans need some of those acres. So we could see a little bit of a acre war between the two. But long story short, world supply is in a fair spot, especially when we've dropped demand so much in the last 4, 5, 6, 7 months. Even thinking back to the African swine fever last year, how many head of hogs were, killed in China? I want to say it was upwards of 30-40% of their hogs, and some reports are even higher than that. That stuff like that's a huge deal. You can't just get that demand back overnight. So we're going to have a surplus, I think, for a couple years, as long as this spring and summer weather continue to remain beneficial. It's going to take, I think, a drop on the supply side to change things quickly. Otherwise, we gotta build demand back up, and that takes time.
I've been in this business a pretty short time, but I've known a few merchandisers, and I know they're pretty protective of their information and what their position is. So I'm not going to ask you to reveal any of your secrets, but what is basis? What is basis, Tyronne?
Basis seems to be that one word that everybody always wants to talk about. I guess the technical answer is it's your local difference from the Chicago Board of Trade to your cash price. From the Chicago Board of Trade futures, on any given day, trade thousands of times a day. You start with that, and you have a local cash price. The basis is your difference, whether you're 10 cents over Chicago price, like we were last summer or early fall, to 40, 50 under. It's what that difference is from the Chicago Board of Trade to your cash price. So those are the three components to figure out what you've got: futures, basis, cash price. How I like to think of it is I feel it's the local market's desire of how much you want to pay for a product based on how much is needed, or how much of a competition there is for that product, and also figuring in how much of supply of that product is out there. So I simply put, it's the local market's appetite for that, what that need of that product is or that commodity is. That'll drive your basis one way or another. So if you have a lot of need for it, a high need for it, your basis tends to narrow up and get stronger. If there's a lot of supply, or like right now, where we saw the ethanol industry within a 2-3 week period in our localized marketplace, most plants have idled or very close to idled. We quickly saw a drop on demand of corn, and thus basis levels went from 5-10 under to 30 to 40 under. That's a reflection of that localized market, that need for that product at that time.
So you're a grain merchandiser, which I think grain merchandising and elevator business has a lot of mystery around it. And I don't know why, but I mean, what you do is kind of complicated. What is grain merchandising?
Yeah, good question. Grain merchandising is, you're going to put yourself in the marketplace to buy and sell bushels, and you're going to try and do it with enough margin intact where you're going to be able to make a profit. There's a lot of different components and factors that make up, add to that equation. You look at one of the main ones is board carries from month to month on different futures periods at Chicago Board of Trade. You buy versus 1 month, you utilize your space at your elevator, whether it's upright space or ground piles, and you want to carry that grain. So you utilize different futures periods where you get those hedges moved out to May or July or September, where you plan on carrying those bushels for a while, and you enhance those margins and earn more carry doing that. So it uses different components to enhance your margins and hopefully you make larger margins where you can actually sell that bushel later on to a strong enough market where you're actually going to make some money.
How important are the future spreads to grain merchandising?
they're very important. Grain elevators would normally stand a chance to make some money or break even. Typically, when there's just a lot of bushels that they're going to handle, and I mean a lot of bushels, or there's great good carries on the futures and spreads. Those two things would typically equate to hopefully some profits in the grain industry if you're a grain elevator. When the markets go, when futures go flat, where your December future is the same price as your March, there's no carry for you to on the board to grab by spreading that December into the March and earning that carry. If that's not there, your only speculation is that your basis is going to get stronger when you turn around and sell that bushel. And that doesn't always happen. So the carries and futures are very important. Probably the biggest challenge of merchandising is actually when futures go inverted. The market's telling you that it wants the bushels now, it needs the bushels now, and it's not incenting you at all to carry that grain 2, 4, 6 months down the road. That usually happens when supply's a little tighter or demand's a lot stronger, but usually it's, in my experience, supply driven, and it's usually short-lived. It doesn't last forever, but it can be very tricky when you start buying grain and hedging grain, and you're going to roll into a slight invert. You're completely banking on basis improving enough to offset that loss. I'm probably getting a little bit more complicated or in-depth than what you wanted to do, but yeah, merchandising it's a challenge, and I'm going to be the first to say I'm not always right by any means. I've been wrong in my career plenty of times, and you just hope you learn from those experiences, you learn from those lessons, and try not to repeat the same mistake a second time.
I would say that's one of your best qualities is, your humility and humbleness, and you're also, your background of, being connected with the farm. You got a good connection with the farm and a good, empathy for the farm. So I think that's what makes you a good merchant. I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to tell me if you agree or not agree, but a meaningful amount of an elevator's margin comes from future spreads, not out of the farmer's pocket. Do you agree with that? Or
absolutely.
Or
Yeah.
disagree?
Yep. No, I agree with that 100%. I don't know how much of it is factored in, but it's a fair amount. I'd say at least 40-50% of what you figure for your margins.
Great.
At least.
So you've worked ADM, you've been in the ethanol industry, and you kind of came back home to your hometown and merchandising at Parkston area, Yankton, at a shuttle facility. What's unique about Dakota Plains as a business model and as anywhere that you've been? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. What's unique about Dakota Plains? It's very family oriented from working with the company, and I know a lot of people say that, but I've worked for basically 4 different companies before Dakota Plains, and it is, in my experience, the most family friendly place to work. Dakota Plains cares about its employees, and we do care about the customers. What is the most unique about DPAC is I've not been involved with a company that has invested so much into helping the farmer market bushels. And what I mean by that is Dakota Plains, for having 2 locations, 2 shuttle shipping facilities, we've got 4 or 5 people that are willing and able to go out and sit at an office desk or a kitchen table with the farmer and try and help them come up with a plan and educate them on different types of contracts and how they can work and going through break evens with them if they're willing and wanting to do that, and try and come up with plans. I've never worked for a company that has put 3 to 4 people in positions and training them to have the knowledge on how to do it and going forth and doing that. And the tools that Dakota Plains offers is the most that I've ever had in the toolbox, as far as different types of contracts and different ways that they can all work and help the farmer hopefully try and do a better job of marketing bushels that they have to sell. There's not always a guarantee that everything's going to work. It's just like any other contract. Some work and some don't, given the time of year that they're put in place. But the main thing is that we have people that are willing to sit down with customers, put plans together with them, and try and help their profitability.
So this is my infamous question that I've been asking everybody. Is the grain elevator still relevant, Tyronne?
Yeah, it's very relevant. I know. You asked Matt that question. You asked Scott that question, and I'll say right now, it's extremely relevant because, not to take what Scott said about it, but our job is to be there when maybe some in the market don't need the bushels or don't want to buy the bushels right then, but there's some people looking to sell it. Our job is to be in there to make that market and give that seller an option and a home for those bushels. And then we turn around and look to sell, ideally when no one else is looking to sell. That's usually when an elevator steps in and starts moving those bushels and keeping the flow into the pipeline. I feel we're very, very relevant all the time. And one of the ways that I'll use an example of it is right now, if we potentially just lost 50+% of our ethanol industry, that's a lot of demand. And who knows how long it's going to be down. If it's down for 6 months, that'd be 1.4 billion bushels of demand not being used. What happens with those bushels? Where do they go? The grain elevator industry is more relevant today than it was 3, 4, 5 months ago. And that we were still relevant then too, but we're more relevant today. We're trying to get more export business. Ports, I'm sure, are looking at trying to get more sales made to get rid of some of the supply that the U.S. needs to move and hopes to move. And by doing that, you've got to use a country elevator that's a shuttle shipper and rail car shipper, and hopefully we get some more export business to do that. It's cyclical, if we fast forward 5, 6 months down the road, yeah, you're going to bring on more demand through ethanol and other places as an end user. But we've kind of taken a black eye a little bit in the last few years, hearing reports from some farmers that even some of their own lenders or bankers will say we don't bring value to the farm. And I disagree wholeheartedly with that because just because we're not that end user doesn't mean we don't bring value to the farm. And it's frustrating to hear that comments sometimes go out there, because right now today, I'll make the perfect argument that I think our elevators are more relevant than some ethanol plants right now that aren't showing bids.
Yeah. So maybe the downside of being a merchandiser is your decisions you have to defend at a board of directors or to a general manager. Talk about, and we talk about emotion with the farmer, but just talk about gut or emotion. And when you're making a decision about your position, is there any comments on that?
Yeah, White Commercial is our introducing broker agent, and they, have the book out there, The Art of Merchandising. And for years, people always debate, is merchandising an art or a science? And in my opinion, there's a little bit of science to it. Some general things that you follow and look for and trends. But a lot of it is gut feel. I'd say at least 2/3 of what I feel I do on a day-to-day basis. A lot of it is gut feel and just following certain things in the marketplace, exports and ethanol grind and the fundamentals, and watching weather patterns and trying to decipher through the truth of the political worldwide headlines you read on a day in, day out basis. Having 3 or 4, this is important to me, having 3 or 4 people that I feel I can trust as resources out in other parts of the Midwest when I want to gather planting information or crop condition information. I want to know I can trust a source. That all plays into the fundamental side of what helps you formulate an opinion on the market. Because you got to have an opinion on what you think things will do, what you think could happen, and then formulate a plan from that. And a lot of that is gut feel. Those opinions are wrong sometimes, and I'm wrong sometimes. And at that point, it's your gut feel that tells you when to alter or change your plans and still make some decisions, even though it's not quite what you hoped for or intended for. It happens all the time. You go into a board meeting and you have to defend those decisions. And one thing that I am about my job, I am passionate about what I do. I love the challenge of it. The day-to-day activity of it is I enjoy it. I'll just say that. And I am passionate about it, but that passion also makes me, it helps me care about what I'm doing. So when I do go into some meetings with the board, and if something happened good, that's great. If something happened bad, I'll explain where I came from and give them my thoughts and my answer on what we tried to do or what we thought was going to happen. And, we work through it. I said it before, I'll say it again. I'm not always right. So we have those discussions once in a while. Yeah, that's a little bit of it. I feel a lot of gut feel and a lot of attention to fundamentals.
What are 2 things a farmer can do to improve? You've worked with farmers all your career. What are 2 things a farmer can do to improve his grain marketing?
That's another good one. Regarding the grain marketing, I think maybe, and we've said it a couple times, we have farmer meetings, and early on when I started in 13, I think you were here in 15 or 16, and I know we had a lot of meetings early on that introduced the different contract options that we offer out here at Dakota Plains. And a lot of it was just trying to educate how those contracts work. And the same premise between every one of those meetings was putting a plan together, knowing your break evens, knowing what profit you were shooting for, and then putting a plan together that you can execute on. And the only thing I would say is just to be more proactive, to actually sit down and go through that exercise on what you plan on growing for your crops this year, how many bushels you think you're going to yield, and give it a fair value. Don't use 100 bushel corn if your APH is 145 or 155. Be fair to it and diligently put that on paper, and then try and come up with something that if we can get $20 an acre locked in, I need to sell 1/4 of it. Or this year, things are looking pretty bleak right now because the commodity market has dropped so much in the last 3-4 weeks. Break even might be good. So maybe a guy shoots for, if we're going to call $525 an acre of cost of production for a corn acre, with your 150 bushel yield, what gets you that break even? And is that a number you should start contracting grain at to know you've got that locked in? Time will tell if there's going to be profits this year. It's probably more going to have to do with yield than price, I think, in 2020. But at least know what you're looking for and be more diligent about putting that plan in place. That's probably the best advice I would have.
Got one more question, then we can kind of end with anything that you want to add. I kind of opened up the video with the merchandisers, the quarterback, or the offensive coordinator. And if your operations is kind of the O line or D line, do you see yourself kind of as a quarterback, is setting the strategy and kind of getting things done or calling the plays, or is that not a fair statement?
No, I mean, it's a fair statement. I'm certainly not alone. Your team on your football field that you just referenced is going to have 11 players, and so I'm just one of the 11th. But Matt is our general manager and CEO and does a great job with Dakota Plains. He has put trust in me from very early on, and in the experiences that I've had throughout my career, and I appreciate that. He's allowed me to formulate a lot of my own opinions and what I feel the market may do, and what I feel we should have for cars in place. And he's been very willing to allow me to make decisions and make my own mistakes, and I appreciate that. So with that as the direction from that merchandising standpoint, which has a very large impact on your company's margins, I feel that is probably appropriate, but it's not alone. You need an offensive line. You got to have the Kevin Murthas and Lyle Hazings out there, and the Matt Shelskys and the Bills and the Sass and the Bows. You got to have you and Dylan and Cody and Jeff. Got to be my receivers and running backs and our accounting staff too. It's the whole team. Dakota Plains is fun to work for. A lot of good people I enjoy working with and having a few laughs with, but I've really loved being here these past 7 years.
Awesome. Anything you want to add that you want to share with the audience? We're going to put this on the interweb, so you're going to be famous. So
the only thing I can say is I do sincerely appreciate the business that you do with Dakota Plains, and if you ever have questions about anything, reach out to Dylan or Colin, myself, Matt, Cody, Jeff. We'll certainly do whatever we can to have discussions with you and want to know what you're thinking out there too. But sincerely, we do appreciate the business you've done with us in years past and hopefully in years to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyronne, for your time. I know it's valuable, and we'll see you when this coronavirus lockdown is over. So
you bet. No, thanks for taking the time and doing this, Colin.
You bet.